Welcome back, everybody. Um, this is part 3 of our modern storage series for this year. Today, we're going to talk about something a little gray and fuzzy. We're going to talk about secondary storage, which, generally speaking, has been associated with the cloud, disaster recovery, and places where or data that you don't want to pay a whole lot of money to store, and yet you need 25 copies of it. And so we're going to start off today by just reviewing quickly, why are we talking about storage? So it's actually sort of funny. I do a lot of meetings. I talk to a lot of people in my rounds every week. And one of the interesting things about the now versus 30 years ago is 30 years ago, we only talked about storage. Everybody was so concerned with how something would get done, it dominated every conversation. Somebody would start a meeting by saying, we need to upgrade our hard drives. And that would be what the meeting is about for the next 17 hours. These days, people start a meeting by saying, we need to grow our sales 30% year over year. And then people discuss like the possibilities of doing that. And then somebody will say, but we're going to have to store like terabytes of data, or maybe they won't even say that. Or like, we'll need to do reports where the implication is a petabyte of data will somehow get like dealt with. And then when somebody says, do we know how to do that? In the meeting, they'll say, oh, I'm sure IT will figure it out. And so like we never talk about storage anymore. And so why are we talking about storage? Well, because storage is an important topic in certain places, in certain audiences. Storage is where information lives. It is literally the memory of your organization. It is your intellectual property. It is the basis of all things, including AI and automation, and even like sending out billing and making payroll. Storage is everything. And so we are in the intelligence revolution. I'm not kidding, it's actually what they called it, industrial revolution cycles. We are in the intelligence revolution, which means we are amassing and analyzing data to find actionable intelligence, to guide decisions, to make decisions at a light speed sort of level. And all of that is about having the right data in the right spot at the right time. So if you didn't know, the amount of data, the amount of storage we're using is quickly moving, and not in the less direction. We're actually doubling data, or even better, every single year. So on the slide, I gave you a couple of years of the global storage footprint. And if you don't know what a zettabyte is, I could tell you, but honestly, it's a lot more fun to Google it, because the number of zeros, depending on which page you go to, is just a little breathtaking. I'm joined today by my friend Butch, who will be taking us through kind of a deep dive of secondary storage in a few minutes. But we spent a lot of time laughing about how in the time of our career, the people who used to break their back moving a 10 megabyte hard drive around, because truthfully, they were really heavy. Now, like, pick up a stick of gum that has 120 terabytes in it. And so when you look at the speed in which data is accumulating around the world, it's a little breathtaking, but also we can all see the trend. It's just going to keep accelerating, particularly, and getting smaller and accelerating more. So with that, I just want to remind you of the 3 different parts of this webinar series. If you go back to part 1, we're going to talk about block storage, the fundamentals of storage, how you aggregate hard drives or whatever label you want to give to SSD, NVMe storage. We all still use the word drive because it slides into a slot, but we all know it's not spinning, right? So, but that fundamental piece, you will find block storage everywhere. In the cloud, on-prem, in your computer, like block storage is around. It's a fundamental piece of how to get data down. That's part 1. Part 2, we dove into unstructured storage, which truthfully is a little fuzzy these days because it used to be all about files. And now we have files and objects. And now we have files and objects and streams as the streaming data and AI sort of universe and IoT take off. all of it unstructured, right? So part two is about that. And then today we're in secondary storage, which backups, objects, and cloud. And so this is such a complicated topic. We're going to try to simplify it by keeping it all about why you should care and the use cases that people seem to talk about the most. So, Butch, if you don't mind, introduce yourself again, and let's dig in.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And Michael, I have to say that, of all the things that I enjoyed doing over the last few weeks, I look most forward to us getting together for these Thursday talks because
Yeah.
walking this thing called storage over the period in time that we've had an opportunity to do it, it's just been, amazing. The mindsets, the growth in technology, and then specifically diving through these things that are kind of critical to how thought processes go, and the growth in data, which is mind-boggling to say the least. Um, I'm Butch McCracken. I started with the Dell team in 2000. They brought me in as a senior SC supporting a lot of the enterprise accounts. I work with Baylor. I work with PepsiCo. I work with, just a number, 7-Eleven, number of local accounts down here, and subsequently started to work with commercial accounts. And now, for the last few years, I've had the opportunity to work with Arrow, specifically supporting different partners. And one of our favorite partners is Mavenspire. They do a phenomenal job, building the trust and teaching, their clients how to make good decisions. And so thanks again for a third opportunity to sit down and have a conversation with you, Michael.
I know you kind of wondered after the second if I'd ever invite you back, right? But it was totally fine.
Yeah. You said, okay, well, we can keep going. And it's funny when you talk about this, and I like the way you said it. We're going to kind of simplify it. For every conversation, every opportunity, the biggest question I have always asked in my career is, how are you going to protect this? What are you going to do to make sure that when you wake up on the weekends, you're fine, you're comfortable, etc. Backup is a big chunk of that. And the cost of backup, as you build these systems out and they grow and they replicate, and now there's copies for each of the different teams in order to do work, it can get out of hand. And that's really where we're going to lean in today. We're going to understand at the end of the day, what some of the alternatives have been up to this point, and specifically now what we get when we add cloud as an option for supporting backup. So I'm going to start off with a slide that's really kind of busy, and it wasn't on purpose, but I wanted to lean in because I want to show the thought process and the complexity of everything in one screen. If you can only digest one screen, this is everything that the new, data protection landscape has to consider.
And it
Going
used
down
to
the
be
pot,
like, let's find a cheap hard drive and stick it under the floor, right? Like,
right?
no,
Cheap and deep,
like if
cheap
you
and
can
deep.
find it under the floor, so can the bad guys. So, and they can steal it, right? So
Right,
you
right.
have all of this other stuff to worry about when you make copies of your data.
So there's everything in this slide, and feel free to screenshot this one. But everything from, the concept of when I boot up my system, I don't want it to be compromised. I want to make sure that the silicon, and when I boot it, it comes back like I want it. I want to make sure that people aren't using USB drives to boot it up. I want to make sure that there's encryption that's in place. I want to see multi-factor authentication so that folks making changes are in fact the same folks that we want making changes. Everything to, I want to make sure that the clock that runs on these systems is consistent and accurate. I don't want to set up my backups and then change a time and say now it is the future, and now I have access to all your files. So it's all these thought processes that cheap and deep just went away. And so now when I think of the new data domain security, you add in all of those functional things to support from a security perspective. And the reason I started here with this very, very busy slide is these are the same tenets and thought processes that go into what happens when I want to store backups in the cloud. It's a logical concept, right? And so we'll walk through what I call the five things that you've been told about cloud storage that aren't
Hey,
really true.
before we jump forward, because
Mhm.
you threw such a big slide up, can you jump back for a second? I
I
just
can.
wanted to make sure that people understood that people who make products do not add features because they feel like it sounds cool. What actually happens, like commercial leases, something happens somewhere.
Right.
Like if you've ever read a commercial lease and you see a clause about zoo animals, it's not because the landlord had a thing about zoo animals. It's because some tenant somewhere in their life brought zoo animals into the office. So
Right.
when you look at slides like this, what's
Mm,
actually happening is somebody did something, right? When we check things like the clock, it's because somebody figured out immutability doesn't work so great if you set the clock forward enough so that it thinks that everything's expired and then wipes it for you, right? The bad
right.
guys are super creative. And
Hmm.
so every time they make a move, someone has to make a counter move. So when you look at
Right.
this list of stuff, this is the crazy hours going in to the chess game of counter and counter move, move and counter move.
Right.
When you look at the center of the slide, like manage detection and response, listen, if you're doing backup and data protection, the truth is when you get breached, it will happen, and you have to restore something. Normally, the forensic team is going to tell you when they got into your network. It won't be yesterday. It'll
Right.
probably be weeks before, which means you have two choices. Roll your backups back before the initial, breach
Right.
and lose all the data, which, by the way, nobody likes that option, like ever. Or have a technology where, given you know what the threat is, it can reach into what's on the storage and filter out the bad guys, but give you back your data from yesterday.
Yes.
That
Yes.
didn't exist before.
Yeah.
It actually
Yeah.
started to happen. And now everybody is very, very focused on how to, um, look at create clean room restores where you can bring it back into isolation and actually eliminate threats, see threats, check things, try to re-put data. Look, this thing is like storage. Like, who wanted storage to ever be that intelligent? No
Oh
one,
my
right?
goodness. Yeah.
Until it
Yeah.
became necessary. And so this is sort of what we're talking about. And of course, now people are doing AI. And, one of the things we commonly make the mistake about is we talk about backup when we're talking about secondary data storage because it's kind of a thing. But backup and archive are two faces of the same task,
Yes.
keeping data for a long period of time. And there's a lot of AI folks that are digging into their archives to get historical data reference that are no longer on primary storage. And so suddenly, this thing that was just about backing things up is now
Mhm.
somehow part of the AI initiative. And so
Yes.
keep in mind when you see slides like this, which I know give everyone a headache, there's a whole story of what is going on. And
Yes.
the list of features when you're searching for how to do a thing is just it's multi-page at this point. And that's
That's it.
it's sort of crazy, but it's also why you see so many products in the secondary storage marketplace
Hmm.
because it's kind of complicated.
This is great. I mean, this is the conversation on each of these, and I should mention everywhere you see something in yellow, it's white papers and so much software behind this. DD booths, uh, compliance modes, all of these things that you said. So this has been a master class. I got that this conversation this week on Monday, and phenomenal to really start to see it on one slide like this. So kudos, we got something as a conversation piece.
I do
Um,
notice they stopped putting two nuclear keys on the slide, but that's a thing with this particular technology where you
right,
need
right,
two independent people to turn the
right.
key to be able to
In order,
actually delete now because they
right,
figured out if somebody took over the one person, like they would delete stuff. So now you need two to be able to actually do it
right,
just like nuclear weapons, right? Like it's
man.
sort of crazy how the level of complexity and process that is
Right.
necessary to maintain security in this day and age.
So crazy. So this is phenomenal. This is phenomenal. So we've leaned into the conversation around the things that are really at a higher or more of a detailed level initially, so that we could back up now and talk about things at a little bit higher of a conversation. When I think about cloud storage, right, which is kind of the focus of this conversation, there's been some things that I've learned along the years, and specifically, I put together this deck to talk about the 5 things you've been told about cloud storage that aren't completely true. So the idea behind this is, for many of us, if you've ever opened a monthly bill for cloud storage and kind of looked at it, sometimes you look at it and go, "What in the world? What's going on here? Really? How in the world do we get to this number so quickly?" And it's because the way things are built in cloud are so much different than you'd think. And as we talked about it in some of the pre-work for this, it's not just the way things are built from a cloud perspective. It's really a combination of the software and choices that you make, the engineering choices in that software, how many times they check, rebalance, move, those types of things in order to do the work that they do. And then on a line by line type of costing, you add those up, and suddenly you know you're infected with a pretty big bill, and you're like, okay, I'm not sure what happened there, but is this maintainable? Is this something that I can manage long term? And so that's what we're talking about. Really, is this really, the crisis is really around IT leaders struggling, kind of being handcuffed, because they really have to figure out, how do I forecast this? How do I budget for this? And what happens if I'm successful? What will that cost be then? So it gets to be interesting. So the intrigued man on the right is studying that bill and trying to figure out, how in the world can I build a strategy based on the frustration that I'm going through. Uh, and so,
I, I read a lot of those bills, and I can tell you that's not what I'm thinking at that moment in time. I am thinking much less polite things.
oh yeah, yeah, this is and so you think about these, and I'll go through each of the 5, but here's a quick summary of it, and it's understanding. We talked about the biggest cost isn't storage; it's really around those fees. We'll dig into that. Secondly, you shouldn't pay to access your own data. That's a new concept. We'll dig into the top tier ransom defense can be free if structured and designed correctly. Archive data that you were just talking about doesn't have to be slow. And hybrid cloud is synergy, not compromise. Understanding where to put data, both on-prem and cloud, and that movement as a part of a strategy is kind of what frees you up to do some pretty cool things. Let's dig into the details. First myth: the biggest cost isn't storage, it's fees. Egress fees. This is the cost when you move data from platform to platform. When you actually go in and query data, that type of thing, and you actually want to move it, these are the costs that come together. So you got your capacity as one cost, of course. Your egress fees is that movement. API requests is another cost that people run into. That's these softwares, and sometimes dueling softwares, making requests against that big storage capacity. And of course, your access fees. How many different tenants do I have going in at a given time? Those are the components that make it up.
Yeah, I would say that what's
Mhm,
really interesting about this is some of this has to do with people figuring out how to do utility computing with
mhm,
storage. And so when when you do it with block storage, it's like impossible to see what's actually going on. So they went with, I can see what happens on the network.
mhm.
So great. I want to encourage you to build my business in the cloud. So I'm not going to charge you for bringing me data. I'm only going to charge you when you take data out, egress, right?
Mhm.
Out data,
Mhm.
which is totally great until you need to get data reports, which by definition are out, right? So
Right.
API requests, I think, really was a function of people trying to understand how to build utility around object storage, because
Right.
like you have the capability with object storage to look at an object, download an object, store an object, cross-reference an object, right? Those are all API calls. So people started saying, well, instead of just metricing the network, maybe it's just better to see when you're actually doing something, which causes us to have to do something with the storage. And,
Yeah.
it's particularly if we're doing magic tricks to like store it on like cheap storage, and then when you need it, we have to bring it up. Like this would be a great indicator of when that's happening. And
Yeah. Yeah.
access fees is, as you said, sort of a little bit more new, where like to actually read it off the disk, you're getting like feed for now because again, they're trying to come up with the model that works. And everybody has a different take on this, by the way. Different vendors are at either giving you very detailed billing or
Yeah.
they're rolling it up into a single rate where they're sort of all you can drinking it. I like to harken this back to like telephone bills. Like in
Yeah.
my lifetime, telephone bills used to be really complicated.
Yeah.
Like I get how it works today, where you just pick up your cell phone, you call whoever, and unless it's international, and even then sometimes, like it's just all included, and you don't really have to think about it. But in like early days, you had to think about whether you had to dial one for something, because even if it
Hmm.
had the same area code and you dialed one, you were getting a fee. And if it
Right.
crossed like a water body, it was in a different ladder, so you were getting a fee. And
Right.
like what was local and what was not, like 10 miles away might not be local, right? And so
Right.
you had all these fees. Now today it's been simplified into almost an unlimited all you can drink kind of model, but it took a while, right?
That
Because
took a
people were
while.
looking at the costs underneath it all. The
Yeah.
same thing is true with this. There are costs underneath producing these services, and people keep trying to figure out how to get their arms around the costs. And so, all you can drink models versus like highly detailed models are just because of the sheer variety of how
Hmm.
people use this stuff.
Yeah.
One of the examples that was given to me recently on API requests is we had a customer who was using a hyperscaler object storage for backup. Seems pretty normal, right? And they were using immutability, and they had to set detailed policies on when data could expire out. And they were using one of the market leader backup softwares.
Hmm.
All sounds completely innocent, right? So the market leader backup software checks every morning to see which data has expired and which should be kept and kind of cleans that up, to save your bill. You don't want to have extra data you're getting billed for, right? But that scan is API requests. And
Hmm.
so what was happening is the bigger your backup, the bigger your daily API request bill was becoming. And it was way, way bigger than the
Man.
cost of storage for the data that needed to be deleted. If they had run that weekly or monthly, like it would have
Oh,
made way more sense. But they did a very rational thing at the beginning of the day. Let's
yeah.
just check what's going on and schedule it. And like this is where those like how is it actually used in the real world versus how did somebody like in accounting figure it out,
Right.
like
Right.
this is where they collide. And so the why you're using it suddenly becomes very possibly the most important thing.
Yeah, this is great. That's a success tax, right? That's the success tax. You got to really kind of look at that and how do you scale in that scenario? This can be
Well, different billing
terrifying.
models for different purposes, right? Like if I'm going to do
Absolutely.
backup, I better be on the unlimited plan on the API and access. And if I'm doing something like document storage or like genomics production or whatever, where the API calls may be very relevant to the
Hmm.
business and use case that I'm doing, it won't be like a lot of extra happening for overhead.
Right, right. So this is these are the components that we struggle with, and when you make those decisions, you don't realize it, and then it matters, right? Because when I start to think about where my next steps may be as a business, whether it's the simple work of doing forecasts and doing those accurately, knowing what it's going to be month to month, it's all now falling back into both how do I grow it, what do I do when I'm successful, and even thirdly, how do I bring on new models? What happens when I want to adopt more AI or analytics into the mix and build out even more solutions? It could be like, okay, my entire ROI is getting eaten up. So that's the myth. You
Well,
really, yeah.
I was just going to say, like, I don't think it's common knowledge that, you build your way of going production.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes production needs to be geographically dispersed. So
Right.
maybe you have two copies of the data to make that happen. Maybe you have n number of copies of the data, right?
Yeah.
But then you want to do backup. And the current IDC recommendation is that when you do like backup, you should have 3 to 5 copies of the data. So if you're keeping track, you're now at 5 to 7 copies of this data.
Yeah.
How much does it cost to store a gigabyte of data if you're making like 7 copies of it for every one that you do?
Oh my
And this
goodness.
is where the predictive economics and forecasting stuff falls off the wagon, because the
Mm-hmm.
people who develop the thing are worrying about the production cost. The
Right.
people who have to operate it have the rest of that stuff that they're coming in. And nobody likes to hear that the G&A and overhead of your application is like 2x what you designed it for. And by the way, it doesn't match your revenue model anymore. Like, that's a huge train wreck, right? So
Right. Right.
that's why everybody sweats this stuff. You have to make sure that in total, like, you're still making money that you expect to make, even doing this right.
Yeah. That's you're spot on. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? So you're going to build a business around this thing somehow, and you don't want to get exposed to that to the end zones. So I think the concept really now that we're kind of driving to is the second myth is like you shouldn't have to pay to access your own data. It's your data. You should be able to access it without having to pay an additional tax. And that's where we start to dig into some of the advantages that we're going to talk about as we close it out. So what are these egress fees? We touched on them, and that's really when you start to move data, the charges that are levied by cloud providers when you retrieve or move your own data out of their cloud environment. So think of a hybrid cloud environment, and maybe you're moving data in or out of that cloud environment at some frequency. Maybe you're archiving off prem. Maybe you're running an active workload on prem, but it's seasonal. But the pricing model effectively kind of holds your data hostage, and that's what we're talking about. There's a huge impact, right? The fees they discourage you from doing things like running backups, or recovery testings, or migrating, to another service. So these are real impact fees, that can kind of lock you into a vendor and limit, a lot of your testing and growth. And
So
that ties your innovation, right?
one quick legal clarification.
Yeah.
So if you are leaving a vendor entirely, there is now legal precedent that says they cannot charge you egress on doing that.
Okay. Okay.
But where it falls down is people will do something like, they'll say, well, we really want to move to another vendor, but we don't want to do it all like a light switch. So we will do
Right.
this over time.
Right.
Well, what happens is that is not covered, because you
Right.
are not like leaving, you're phasing out. Phasing out is not leaving exactly, or at least legally. So
Right. Right.
like, you have to make the choice and hold the choice if you really want to avoid the egress on it's like the security deposit fee getting eaten up by changing light bulbs when you move out of a rental property. Like you
Yeah.
get one argument on this. So make sure you're really, really leaving. But if you're phasing out, make sure you're budgeting in egress.
Yeah. That's key critical. I tell you, there was one account that we kicked on from a real world perspective that I thought was interesting. Where the Webb County team, Joseph he's the system administrator over at Webb County. He says, understanding that if you could have a solution where there's no egress, this is the philosophical shift in how you actually build out and grow your solution. So your data should truly remain yours. If you're putting it out there, you're using it for certain capabilities, it needs to stay out of the mindset of like, okay, now every time I move it, I got to pay a charge. And so the solution we're talking about takes that off the table. So that's the biggest myth number two. I'm going to move into the biggest myth number three, and that is that top tier ransomware defense can be free. This is myth number three. What am I talking about? Uh, Backups are under attack. We always have known that, but it's understanding that you've got some steps that you can take to protect. Now, when I'm looking at attack on backups, there's certain tenets of an attack, certain capabilities that different attack softwares they have fingerprints that you can kind of go out and determine, who's doing what, and really those that really understand how the forensics work can kind of point to and go like, hey, there's a certain change here that we've noticed that makes it look like you're under attack. So attackers identify backup systems with sophisticated software, malware that they're running out in the real world, and they go in and they may encrypt the primary data backup and charge you for a recovery option and force ransomware payments to get that data back. So that's why these backups are under attack. Uh, and they've become a prime target, because it's almost an easy money scenario. There's different kits out there on the dark web to allow for this, and kind of it's become more popularized over time. So it's like you said, Michael. It's not if, it's kind of a when you get attacked. You've got to really start looking at this in earnest, and especially when you've got a successful model that's all data dependent. This is the key to, how do I grow this with no fear? So the key here is there's something that we want to introduce called immutable storage. And the power of immutability is saying, I want to be able to have a backup, and I want that backup to be secured or kind of a virtual air gap from the rest of the world. Now, we had originally considered this conversation when you think of the data domain, and it was physically a plug that you not physically disconnected, but in software completely disconnected, so no internet could access this backup. This is now being propagated to say, let's take that to the understanding of, we also want to disconnect the system administrators and the users from that backup. We want to be able to put out a copy that no one, as an example, under governance can change regardless of what level they are. So, two ways to do this. One way is I could have data out there and I could say, this is going to be protected until date X, and you can maybe a system administrator can make that change. Another way of doing governance is, no, you can set a date and no one can make that change. Again, these are features that were added because something came up that was really, really bad. Have you seen this, Michael? Have you run into this requirement?
Oh yeah, and you know, I will say that not all immutability is the same. Like
Yeah.
for a lot, software immutability is super funny because if somebody formats the hard drive, it doesn't matter what the software says. So
Right. Right.
like the whole the fortress kind of concept is super big. And you know access control, immutability, what privileged user management, keeping administrators and having two keys, like all of that again is coming about because people are figuring out, well, okay, so the real truth is, if you are a hacker and the
Yeah.
new day, game of the game is to get copies of data and sell it, right?
Hmm.
Not really destruction of operations, but get the data. So you have a choice. You can go to all the systems in a customer site and get the data individually,
Yeah.
or you can just make a copy of their backup because they
Hmm.
already did it for you. Isn't that nice of them?
Right.
So, so all of the game has changed in terms of making sure it can't be destroyed, because that's the kicker, right? I make a copy
Right.
of your data, then I kill your copy of your data. Now I'm the only one with your data, and it was so easy. Thank you so much, right? Um, but you
That's your
also have to
plan.
protect all of that. So it's
Yeah. Yeah.
immutability means so many different things now, but it's not just the power to delete something, but the power to get it unauthorized.
Yeah. So that's a great way to put an exclamation point around that this whole protection thing is, it's key critical, and now it's essential. It's table stakes, right, for solutions that we want to keep long term. Um, which leads us kind of to myth number four: the archive data that we've always thought of as cheap and deep storage used to be the slower tier, right? It was maybe the spinning media. It was the 7,200 RPM, disks that were running a little bit slower, and we didn't really care if they were running fast as long as we could, support some type of a backup window. Well, guess what? That archive data doesn't have to be slow. This is kind of leading into what you were saying, Michael. What happens when that archive data really becomes a tier of the application? And certain capabilities of what you stored, seasonally years ago at a particular Christmas for retail now kicks off like this resembles the COVID Christmas. Let's pull the details and understand how we successfully navigated that and build a strategy to grow it. So it's understanding that archive data now really it's not just cold tiers out there in the world. It could be very active. It may be files that you may need at any given time. Add to
Have you
that.
ever seen a tape array?
I have. I've been in
I mean,
rooms.
it astounds me that many of the glacier-like, Library of Congress like giant archives are
Right,
still based on that technology, because as many times as people say that tape is dead, the fact remains they keep getting bigger, just like
right.
drives. And
Yep,
so when you build those robotic arm things that you used to see in movies where they're pulling tapes and moving it around, like it still lowers the cost per gig of storage. But
right,
and that's how like information people research has been stored for a long time. The big change that you're talking about now is people moved into like sort of like backup storage thinking where it's insurance, right? What are the
right,
chances that we'll ever
right,
use it? But then two things happened. One, they started using it more frequently and realized, if it's slow getting on, it's slow getting off.
yes.
Like now I need to do a restore. I have a half an hour to do it, and it is on the world's slowest media where I
Right,
could literally carry the drive faster across state lines than get it back, right?
right.
And it creates
Yeah,
this crazy sort of scenario. And then with research data, with the data lake being in the archive tier, you want to do a new analysis of marketing trends to tweak your marketing campaign that launches at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and
mhm,
people laugh at you and say it'll be at least a month before you get the report back, right?
yeah,
This whole idea that slow is acceptable, that has not been a thing in a long time. That's like telling people that their email will be offline for 8 hours. Like they say it's okay, and then at minute 5 they start calling you, right?
yeah,
It's not a reality. And so having to build it into whether you're talking about cloud storage or secondary storage, that there's some way to deal with the economics, but also deal with the performance. It just makes sense because people put it there and then realize the application that's newly created next week, it just won't tolerate that. It needs
right,
to move
right.
as fast as it needs to move.
So there's a mindset, there's a trade off, and you think there's a trade off, but now we're dealing with solutions that change that paradigm and make these data lakes you know real life, real life. Wow. So myth 5 is really understanding that hybrid cloud is really about synergy, not compromise. Um, this is really the big eye opener for me, and it is, before I would always consider hybrid cloud as yeah, the world is moving to it, and it's a necessity, and it's really because there's needs in the cloud, and there's opportunities or software in the cloud that needs access to my data, and it's being application driven. It's an either or kind of scenario, and it's like no, it's a multi cloud world. So the new vision for a hybrid cloud is really that you have strengths to having some data on-prem. You have a cloud advantage where it's appropriate, and that could be for a number of reasons, whether it's applications running against a particular component of your data, or even archive and the things that we've talked to before. But if you strategically look at how that integration works, that workflow for your business, this is a huge differentiator. You should have the best of both worlds, and you shouldn't have to compromise in order to grow something that's really significant. So, I kind of bring you back to the answer to these things, and that's really understanding what we'll talk about next is really a partnership between Dell and Wasabi, and it's an integral way of coming to answer those five myths and solve for a solution that has been very, very helpful for a lot of the teams out there.
Yeah, so I think that it's funny. The marketing term follows the thought, which updates things. I've actually been thinking a lot about the terms hybrid cloud and multi-cloud, which are actually a couple of years old, right? They're
Yes, yes.
and hybrid cloud was the term people coined when they said they wanted to do like a little cloud. It's when people started to not have like passive data centers originally. They wanted to
Hmm.
contract a colo, and that was like the hybrid part of the on-prem equation. And then people started to say, um, well, no, no, no. Hybrid is more like I pick one cloud vendor and maybe some of my stuff is out in the cloud, but I still have like a data center at home. And if you look at it, and by the way, multi-cloud was defined as if you had more than one cloud vendor
Hmm.
and you had some data at home. And sometimes it meant that all of those things were active. They were all operating in production at the same time. It was like the more complex version of hybrid, right? When I sit down with people these days, it's super funny to have a conversation where you're like, hey, just a quick question. Do you have M365 or Google Workspace? Yes, great. So you're in the cloud. Well, no, we have a data center. Oh, so you're hybrid then. Well, we don't think of it that way. We think of it
Right.
more as a like collaborative SaaS and data center. Okay,
Right.
well, do we have um, like software that's looking at the data and say like you're collaborative? Where is the software? Well, it's on-prem. Right. So you're like kind of mixing stuff, right?
You are.
It's
Yeah.
sort of like hybrid and multi-cloud have become normal when you start
Hmm.
defining software as a service applications being in different clouds and right and people are now kind of racing to catch up with the idea that their data like moves around for data gravity right
Yeah.
closer to the application. It's in all different sorts of places and that management exists whether you meant to or not, right? AI
Right.
and shadow AI have sort of like lit that up again as
Right.
people are like putting data out into chatbots to like get them to do cool things. Well, that again is multi-cloud kind of thinking, right? And so it is sort of funny. Now, Dell is a big company. Dell Technologies is a big company who has
Hmm.
lots of friends, lots of agreements, lots of alliances. And as the world evolves, they sometimes have to kind of alter their alliances. So the idea that Dell has a more recent thing with Wasabi is just speaking to the fact that the problems that they're trying to solve have changed a little.
Yeah. Yeah. This is the key critical thing. Understanding the strengths of both, looking at those five myths and understanding this is a perfect partnership. And so, we digged in last time to understanding unstructured, understanding power scale and object scale. These are solutions that are really tailor made to be adapted to support the Wasabi solution. And it eliminates a lot of that. It takes care of the mindset of, how do I handle exponential growth? Because using Wasabi, we just got one cost, really the cost of the capacity on the store on the cloud solution, and you don't pay those extra fees. They take care of all of that for you. So
Unlimited minute
now you're
plan.
gonna, yes, that is the most phenomenal thing, and it's performant, extremely performant. So you get the uncompromised performance, you get the mindset that you've got a financially comfortable base to start with, and then of course, from our first slide, all of the tenants that we needed from a security perspective have to be called for or have to be pulled forward. So I've got multi-layer protection in there for a number of different, whether it's SOC 2, ISO, HIPAA, GDPR, GDPR, all of the things that may be under my big umbrella form of support. I've got all of that, and I haven't really, lost anything. So that path to the future really is understanding that you've got a future proof this scenario, and it's those two partners working together that gives you that comfort level of that future proof type of scenario. So, any thoughts on this part?
I mean, I think that anybody who is doing relationship with cloud providers needs to understand that you have to pick a partner that has to follow the same security rules that you do.
Yeah.
So if you are a HIPAA organization and you put it out in a cloud that isn't HIPAA compliant, that's kind of a big red flag problem. So that's the thing, right? Most people get this and they actually check, but not everybody. Sometimes people forget that it doesn't matter if you encrypt the data out there.
Mm-hmm.
Again, the bad guys love to go find where you put it in a nice, neat little bowed bundle for them and steal it, and they can try to crack the encryption, and they have some time, right? So particularly with quantum these days, they have time. So you
Yeah.
need to make
Yeah.
sure that the people that you're in business with together are following the same rules of the road that you are. It's pretty straightforward stuff.
You know, I like to, kind of back this up with some proof points because a lot of folks may be thinking we're talking only slideware. In this case, Cornell University, as an example, they save $50,000 annually just on data retrieval costs, and that's not counting the administrative and the strategic upside of what they did. Hardin County government, they were able to operate an ironclad annual budget and keep these things consistent because their retrieval costs were month to month and they were consistent. So, when I think about, integrating this into their solution, gave them predictable spend, stable operations, and no more panic when it came time for procurement. And then we mentioned Webb County, Texas. They use Dell and Wasabi in a reservable hybrid architecture, and they avoided some of this cumbersome CapEx approval cycle because they could burst quickly into this space, and they're using this usage based billing, uh, using Wasabi's account control manager and an ability to actually bill out to the different departments. And the result is business units got autonomy, and IT governments was improved. Um, so these are just three use cases of many use cases out there that you have to really consider when you start to look at this type of solution. And now Wasabi is introducing a high performance storage class that's purpose built for AI. It's the all the high bandwidth, high intensity workloads, performance with zero movement penalties. Again, it's fluid, and in the phrase, it's AI without the egress anxiety. So, you know, it's time to just kind of think about what we've talked about and understand that if you're working with a company like Mavenspire on these types of solutions, they're introducing you to something that's got 11 nines of durability. It's got S3 compatibly wired into the environment. You got encryption at rest. You got multi-factor authentication, all the protections and those types of things in the type solution. And they, for me, take that additional layer of anxiety off the plate. So, I just enjoyed talking and working with this team. Michael, thanks again for your time on this.
Well, thanks so much. I'm happy we did the series together, and I'm looking forward to the next thing together.
Awesome.
Thanks everyone for checking in with us today. I hope this was informative, educational, and I hope to see you in the future. Thanks everyone.
Thank you.